Hello and welcome to the Projector Stories Podcast. My name is Sarah. I am a 1-3 emotional projector.
Hello, I'm Lora. I'm a 5-1 splenic projector.
And this is our weekly-ish podcast where we just talk about our journey in deconditioning and human design, being projectors, both having the 1156 channel of storytelling. So as usual, this will be non-linear and very related to what we are dealing with in live and living color. Lora, is there anything that has happened this week that is human design related or projector related or deconditioning related that you'd like to touch on?
Sort of. It's a response to things, everyone else doesn't know yet, but it's a response to something that you've showed me this past week. But it's not that like anything happened in actuality, it's just thoughts and internal machinations that relate to being a projector and deconditioning and all that, but in like live and living color, not so much. But I can go into that story if you want right away, or it has something happen to you concretely.
No, you can go into that. You can go into that. Everything else will start to connect together from that, I feel like.
Okay, so you, Sarah, sent me a post on Instagram this past week by a 5-1 emotional projector who said that thinking about an idea is initiating or is initiatory. I can't remember the specific term he used. He didn't say initiating, but it has the energetics of initiating. And a lot of people were triggered by it. Myself sort of included, not that I'm triggered by it, but it's just like, it makes you think, for one, because logistically, I have to sort of disagree because with the 1156, we're always thinking up ideas. Like we cannot turn off the idea, thinking up contraption that is our minds. That is how our minds work, but they think up ideas for other people. But thinking up an idea and just pondering what would happen if we act on it without doing anything at all, it's hard for me to accept that as initiating. And this past week, I was frustrated, to use a generator word, with being a projector and the woes of not being able to, or like not being able to initiate, putting myself into the little projector container where I don't allow myself to initiate because I'm trying to follow strategy and authority. And that little thing, that idea that I want to act on, is teaching ballet. So y'all know, my only ever exercise is going to ballet class once a week. And this past week, there was a student who was having knee pain. And me being a gunslinger at the end of class couldn't help myself, and confronted her about her knee pain, because my teacher, who I go to and have been going to for like a decade, basically, I go to his class for specific reasons, not are which, like when you go to ballet class, you like receiving corrections from the teacher. Like it helps when the teacher tells you what you're doing because you're not aware that you're doing certain things, and so you want to be corrected in that setting. And my teacher is very laissez-faire. He's very laid back, and he doesn't give a lot of corrections. And so I feel like I've had to, sorry, this is a whole tangent, but I've had to learn ballet myself by watching videos, like doing the investigator thing, watching videos of professionals taking class online to see what they're doing and to mimic them instead of doing things in class. Like I have kyphosis and lordosis. My spine is crunchy. It is very, very curvaceous when it's not supposed to be. And I've been dancing with him for a decade, basically, and he's hardly ever corrected my posture, which is an easy correction. And yet he's never felt inclined to tell me to try to improve my posture during class. Or maybe he did and I didn't understand it, and so he gave up on me. I don't know. I don't remember. But during COVID, I got an online teacher because in-person classes were suspended. And so I found an online teacher, which I think is a projector worthy interlude. So I'm just gonna ramble away again in the middle of my other tangent, which was I'm a splenic being. Ideally, like I should live existentially, but it's hard to do so. Anyways, back during COVID, I woke up in the middle of the night at like 3 in the morning, couldn't sleep, scrolled on Instagram, saw this teacher, ballet teacher, who like has a online program where she has different courses for, working with your body to like achieve certain goals. Anyways, I made a random purchase in the middle of the night without like any intention of doing so. It was completely splenic in that sense that I was just like, I guess we're doing this. Whipped out my credit card in the middle of the dark bedroom and made that purchase. And I really loved that teacher and working with her. And in working with her, I became aware of like a lot of things that I was doing wrong with my body that my regular teacher that I go to doesn't give me. Anyways, so I've just been thinking about the value of going to my specific teacher. And I have a friend in ballet class, and we were talking about how there's not a lot of teachers in our area, and we go to him because that's our basically only option. Anyways, cycling back to this girl in ballet class, like I was the whole gunslinger and walked up to her and was like confronting her about her issue and giving her corrections that our teacher wasn't giving her, that I feel like would fix her pain if she knew how to use her body properly, which her teacher, even though he's great, like wasn't giving her that correction. And so this got me thinking like I should teach ballet classes because I'm a self-proclaimed investigative expert, being a 5'1". And though I'm not a professional dancer, like I've been dancing since I was 2, fairly long time, since I'm 31. So, well, not constantly all of those years, but decently long amount of time. And I was thinking about this, knowing like I'm not going to initiate, I'm not going to start teaching beginner ballet classes, even though in my head I'm coming up with curriculum. I'm just not going to do it because I'm a projector and I have to be invited to use my energy in such a like manifesting, initiating way, and then a generative way to like show up to class consistently to be able to teach students. And so I was frustrated with like, oh, woe is me, I'm a projector, I can't offer my gifts to the world because of my circumstances of my aura type. And perhaps one day someone will recognize me and something will happen, perhaps not, who knows? I don't know what my trajectory is, just living the daily life. But I've been having all these thoughts, and then Sarah sends this post to me about having an idea in and of itself is initiating, and I'm just like, I don't know whether or not I can agree with him, because am I like, I'm not doing anything, I'm using up my mental energy and my mental faculties to think about non-existent curriculum. Sure, like maybe it's a waste of my mental energy, I don't know. Sarah, I talked for like 10 minutes. What would you like to say about this post and how you feel about it and whatnot?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of, it's funny, I have a lot of it's like heretical opinions on the heretical opinions of the 5-1. Like everything that he said, I was just like, I understand where this is coming from, but no, like, and it's the universalization of the 5, I think, in a sense. And it's also like um we're only able to have access to our own experience, and our experience, we can watch our experience and it can be really true for us, but that doesn't mean that it's true for everyone. And Ra was a 5-1, but Ra had gotten mutated by the voice, and so he has, despite the fact that there's a lot of burning at the stake moments with Ra too, with other people, right? There's a lot of people who first put him on a pedestal and then knocked him down. Like, he comes off to me as someone who is truly living their own design, and he says multiple times within his teachings that like he had to learn all of this stuff himself, and all of this stuff is coming from a personal perspective, and because that's what his perspective is. And so I mean, I'm going to pull a bunch of threads here, but there was something else that was said, which is that there's a lot of 5-1s that are out there that are choosing to use their one as opposed to finding out what the truth is for themselves, leaning on Ra's truth and universalizing that, which I tend to agree with as a 3, like as a body 3. And so I will always, even if you're not a line 3, to me, it's like we're all the time living in our not self, living in our mind. Whether we know human design or not, the not self doesn't go away. We just become less violently disturbed by it to the point of inducing action, right? So in my personal life, my whole life has been crazy, but I know that I've had really good experiences where I've initiated things where I've known that I'm welcome. I don't know if it's my emotional definition, my ajna definition, so I have a lot of awareness, or it's my open G center, but like people always invite me places and to things. And even if they aren't saying the formal invitation, I get the sense that they really want me to go. And like, I won't always go, 9 times out of 10, I don't go anyway. I was really being a projector in some ways before I knew what a projector was. But for me, it's like the first 7 years, you are cleaning out your awareness, you're cleaning out your body and the awareness, and you're still going to be living in not self. And so for me, it's like the whole thing is a effing experiment. Whether you're a 1-3 or not, from the premise of human design is an experiment. So of course it probably works better for 3s, because I understand that if heretics say the wrong thing, they're going to get burned at the stake. But like, you still have to learn how to be that thing correctly, instead of just like choosing to never do anything and never get burned at the stake. So there has to be instances where you're learning by your own lived experience what's going on. And so as far as that post goes, typical open G center, I'm like, interesting, taking it in, know that that's not necessarily true, know that there's a part of me also that there's part of my not self that likes to convince itself that it's myself. You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of different things going on there. But yeah, I mean, as far as what the mind goes, I have an active mind. The idea that you thinking and something is initiating is hilarious to me, because my mind just goes. I have no idea what it's going to do, and it is constantly on and thinking. And so if that's the case, then like I am constantly initiating, but I have no control over the thoughts. So what to do, I mean, I could see if you're like, if you have like a passive mind where like the efforting into the initiating may happen, but like, again, it's not something you can universalize. So, it's all, the whole post was very interesting, and like seeing the reactions to the post was interesting, and realizing that perhaps where he was coming from with the post was like a good place and from his own experience. But I'm always only going to trust my own experience, and so I'm like, no, like I'm not doing that. I'm going to investigate, and I'm going to martyr myself. That's it. But as far as you go in your ballet class, I mean, this goes back, and this is my perhaps unpopular opinion, but I think that anything that you learn, that you're learning as a right mind without necessarily having an agenda behind it, but you're learning it out of just like the love of the game in a sense, is worth learning. So if you were to decide to study what it takes to become a ballet teacher, whether or not that materializes, if you enjoy the process of studying it in a classroom setting or in a setting like that, then you should. I mean, because, it's going to all get stored in your memory. And maybe when the world falls apart, you're going to be the only person that's going to remember enough to actually be able to teach ballet. Just kidding. Um, but like that's, that's kind of my take. It's like, yes, I understand if you have this, with Lora having a passive, receptive mind, um, she isn't supposed to be strategic about the things that she's learning. But I think if she's genuinely interested, if you're generally interested, Lora, in learning something, then you should be able to learn it no matter like what the avenue to learning it is. Like you said, you purchase something in the middle of the night online on some kind of weird tip. And like a lot of this back and forth is just your mind going back and forth, blocking you from doing what's natural for your body to do. And I can't say that that's definitively what this is, but I know that the back and forth, even me trying to figure out what's correct, is getting in the way of me being correct, right? So now I just talked for 10 minutes. What do you got?
That's how it goes. It's our really, really slow motion tennis match, like zooming back and forth, except it's like 10 minutes for the ball to go from one side of the court to the other. Um, on that note of like what to respond to what you were saying, let's see if my brain can remember the things that it wants to say. It's one thing to learn something because your body wants to learn it, but you have to look at the intentions of wanting to learn that thing. Is it just simple curiosity? A lot of times are not self, I would say, especially with the ego center being undefined for you and me, and for everyone else who has it undefined. So often that little center can like whisper little secrets in your ear and say like, do this thing, do that thing, with the intention of somehow proving value through whatever it is. And that can happen in learning, like thinking, oh, I want to learn this thing because then I'll have value, or I'll be able to do something with it, or it'll like give me something in return. It's like being strategic about learning. And yeah, it's hard to discern, is it the not self that's motivated behind learning the thing, or is it the true self that's motivated behind learning a thing? Because like you and I, we both have that one energy. We're investigators, and so we are natural students. We will naturally be curious from our lack of foundation, that insecurity that wants that solid foundation. So it's going to learn all the things that it needs to learn to sort of feel secure. But at the same time, I can imagine, the not self getting involved. But like it's one thing to learn, and it's another thing to want to teach. So like you could want to learn to teach for the sake of wanting to learn to teach, or you could want to learn to teach for the sake of wanting to prove yourself as that teacher. Which I don't know, like part of like if we're analyzing what I said, me comparing myself to my current teacher and being like he's not offering us enough of an education for us to do ballet well, me seeing what's lacking with my gate 18, there is a sense of like trying to prove myself against him, thinking I'm better than him, though I'm not. Though maybe, I don't know, let's not get into that territory. But yeah, it's hard. So there's that piece. There's other pieces, but I forgot what they are. So we'll just, with my side, leave it with the ping pong there, or the tennis ball there.
The volley.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's with when it comes to like like what you're saying with the not self, I feel like when you're doing something because it's not self, you quickly lose the energy for it. Like that's how I know. Because of
Mm-hmm.
course in college, everything that I studied, it was actually a really good this is actually a really good way to just show you how split I am within myself, or how split I was within myself. Not just because I'm split definition, but because of how I showed up in college with my open G center. And I studied English because I loved English. And I studied economics because I needed to prove my worthiness.
Yeah.
And I couldn't decide what my identity was. And, I had to force myself to do this economics work. I mean, it was not pretty. I mean, there was certain classes depending on the teacher that were better than others, but nothing like fully grasped my entire attention like taking 20th century lit. And so I saw the energy that I had for one when I didn't have the energy for the other. Like my ego, my not self ego, all of the conditioning within that, it was definitely active in me needing to study the economics, and I could see, if I try and force myself to learn something, I can't do it. If I try and force myself to read a book, I can't do it. As soon as I'm fucking on, though, when I want to learn something, like it's just, I have to learn it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Like, and I actually know the difference too between the pressure in my head when other people are asking me questions that I'm not interested in. I've started to be able to discern that. And like what I actually am interested in learning, I can just absorb a insane quantity of information. So, you know, going back to the ballet teaching, I mean, I think you'll know pretty quickly if something's correct for you if you lose energy doing it, or you don't have the capacity to do it, because it was coming out of your undefined not self ego to begin with. But I agree in the sense that the not self ego and what it does to the mind, first of all, it's the most conditioning factor of a chart. All other things equal. Of course, I could talk about split definitions and the gates that bridge splits, but as far as centers go, the not self ego is the number one. And I know that I am still violently bound to it in a lot of ways. I have all of the thoughts that come streaming in my mind about how I need to be proving my worth um when anything happens, like things that have happened from the past. And I think this is where deconditioning comes in. Like if we try and force ourselves to be perfect within even the minutiae, like the smallest decisions of our lives, it's never going to happen in these first 7 years. Our cells are all conditioned. And so, there has to be a kind of grace with the experimentation, at least for things that have low impact on us. Um, as opposed to like buying a house or choosing a partner or choosing a career, like all of those things. If you're studying it because you want your career to be a ballet teacher, that's different than studying it because you love learning about the nuances of the different movements in ballet and how they're supposed to be done properly with your gate 9, with the details. It's a different energy. And the other thing I just want to say is that line 5s are teachers. Like everyone calls the 6 the role model, but line 5s are the teachers. They really are. And so I don't think that there's anything unnatural about that. About that.
Yeah, but it's going back to the foundation of like, no one invited me. So, yeah, as a non-energy being, it's fearful and frightful to consider entering into something when energy is already so limited. Because burnout, like, it takes a lot to recover from projector burnout. I feel like you do one little thing and it takes like 7 times that amount of time to recuperate from whatever time you spent doing the thing that you weren't supposed to be doing. So, or maybe that's a lack of line 3 resiliency. I don't know. So it makes me hesitant to try things, which I think I've mentioned here before. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
think too that oh gosh, I don't know what his name is. I'm not going to pronounce it right, so I'll just leave it out. But I think that he mentioned too at some point that like line 5s, like you guys get burned more quickly and easily, whether we're talking about it probably in the term in physical burnout or like the negative repercussions of not following strategy and authority. Um, and I get that, I do, especially because you don't have any motors.
That's interesting to think about because you see all these other people within the community who do struggle with burnout or who don't, and you wonder how are they so resilient? Is it their 3 energy, or is it something else? And so that's a very interesting piece of the puzzle if it is that 5s burn out more easily because of us constantly attracting the projections and expectations of others. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and so, it's a different life. I mean, that's for sure. That's for sure. It's definitely a different life. And of course, like, we could make arguments on either side. Like, I could say, well, that girl who was, even though you were initiating, did you get the sense that she was repulsed by your giving her advice on what was going on with her?
No, but my teacher was repulsed by it, and he made a witch doctor joke, which because like I was like, oh, have you gone to the chiropractor? And then like my friend said to her, oh, have you gone to this person? And then he's like, oh, have you gone to the witch doctor? And like I didn't share that I kind of self-identify as a witch doctor, but he was like poking fun, like in a icky way, not like ah ha ha witch doctor, but more of just like, who are you to be giving advice to her? But like she was not repulsed by it, no.
Okay, well, and that's also, the thing that I realized too is, something that I don't know if it was Ra or who said this. I was listening to something about the open ego center person and the open ego projector. The open ego and the open G center projector, like, they can move through society in a way. Like, there's a capacity. This is going to seem like it's not related, but I'll pull it all together in a second. Like, they can move through the ranks and the hierarchies, very 50 line or gate 54, the marrying maiden, of changing their, it's kind of like when you outgrew perhaps the capacity of the teacher. And I think that's because, I mean, it's not necessarily because, but I think it's interesting to think about in terms of the fact that, like, we're able to slide in and out of places and things within different hierarchies because we don't have that kind of stuckness that a defined G, like, where it knows what's correct for it, would have. And so there's a lot to be said. I mean, we can also say he's in his not self, the teacher, like, you're in a not self class full of not self students with a not self teacher. You'll probably be in the same situation if you get an online teacher that is teaching you how to teach ballet. There's a lot of just because other people are not living correctly according to themselves does not necessarily mean that, and this is actually, oh my gosh, okay, I'm going to go all over the place, but this is also interesting because I was thinking about it in terms of projectors and the fact that projectors are told that they can invite other projectors, but it's like the projector aura, whether it's felt by another projector or a generator, if you are penetrating a person that does not want to be penetrated, no matter what their energy type is, like, that's not self. And so sometimes people will put you into a state of resistance because they're in a state of resistance themselves. And they're doing things that are against their own strategy and authority. And perhaps you just happen to be there for it. Nobody else is thinking this deeply about their behavior, probably, as people who understand human design. So you're dealing with a lot of blunted edges, in people. And it makes it difficult to ascertain whether or not you're getting a negative response from someone because you have stepped out of your own boundary, out of your own strategy and authority, or if it's because they just are in their not self and they're just prickly, like the not self emotional person is a prickly ass motherfucker. Like, and it's not necessarily your fault if you get the prickle, but it's just, because you happened upon them on your line of geometry and they weren't ready for you. I also noticed that a lot of times people who need you the most are going to be the most prickly towards you if they're in their not self, because you represent the fact that they can't live out the truth of who they are, and they have to, I guess you could say, defend their life choices by basically negating yours, even if you could help them. And so it's a complicated relationship we have with people. I mean, I think I realized within a relationship this past year that like someone was correct for me, but they were not ready for me on my fractal line. And the, you know, the kind of shit that ensued because of that made me feel really unworthy. But really what it came down to is like someone in their not self, incapable of accepting who it was that they really are, you know, and my shining a light onto it. So yeah, I've gone all over the place here. This is like a, you know, this is just because for me, like I would rather, and I'm a 3 body. I feel like I almost want to be not a 3 for a second so I could say this without that connotation of knowing that I'm a 3. But like in the experiment, while we're deconditioning, it's like shining a mirror. It's like cleaning a mirror that's been deeply distorted. And so it is just folly to assume that you're going to be able to make any decisions that are correct until you have made the wrong decisions and you see you have the awareness to see what your motivation and your perspective behind those decisions were and why they led to the wrong outcome. And then as that awareness grows, you basically, the hold that your not self open centers have on you dissipate. But it has to come through awareness, not just through theoretical correct or incorrect behavior. And so how do you increase your awareness without seeing yourself in the incorrect motivation? I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine that it would be that easy to do. So I don't know, Laura, do you want to?
But there's just like a lot of good nuggets. I hope y'all are listening with your ears wide open because this is so far a good episode. Kudos to us and our right minds. But we can leave this to rest because we've been at it for 30 minutes and move on. So I'll ask you, Sarah, is there anything that came up this week that you want to elaborate on that relates to
good call. Good
projector?
call. There's so many things. One thing that I really wanted to talk about for a second, because this shit is fucking wild, y'all. Like, this is crazy, is like my new understanding of planets and what their relationship is, because I'm simultaneously finishing rave psychology and reading personality resonance mapping. And so the personality resonance mapping, though, has like made me aware that the planets Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, and Neptune are the planets that are basically like in charge of the Maya. And so like as a student of traditional astrology, I understand the archetypes of these planets pretty damn well. And it's always been intriguing to me because what I've realized now is that when you have these planets placed in places that they like to be, they will, in essence, create a deeper hold on you and your relationship to the homogenized field. For instance, Neptune conjunct the ascendant, Marilyn Monroe. Everyone's like, oh, she's a projector. Yeah, she died at 36 because she was so fucked up. She was an emotional split definition projector. And it's like, you know, everyone would be like, oh, I wish I was her. I wish I was her. She was her not self. That Neptune that was conjoining her ascendant was like, we're going to make you super famous in the homogenized not self world. And I mean, that's not what it was saying, but that's, you know, that's what I've taken from it. And so I've been thinking about these planets in a whole new way, because ancient astrologers considered at least Venus and Jupiter to be benefic planets. Mercury was considered pretty neutral, and Neptune was considered more in modern astrology a higher octave of Venus. And what all of this has brought into my conscious awareness is that the planets that are considered more difficult actually create what is called this Martial diagonal, and the Martial diagonal is only accessible through 9-centered awareness and 9-centered being. So 7-center pre-1781 we didn't have access to living life in this way. And Mars is at the center of this whole magic square resonance mapping situation. And it's primarily responsible for our mutation and our evolution, even though it's been kind of put off as being like an impetuous, impulsive, aggressive planet. Yes, if you are living your not self life, that is how Mars is going to show up. But if you're thinking, if you are expanding your consciousness, the way that it's going to happen is through Mars and the planets that are connected through the Martial diagonals, which are the Moon, Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus. And it's really interesting to me because I'm a deeply Plutonian person. I'm a deeply Saturnine person. And I have Venus and Jupiter in detriment, or what Ra has labeled detriment in the Rei Vi Ching. And so I think part of my distaste for the homogenized world, without even knowing human design, like comes from the fact that like I wasn't really built to flourish in it. It's what kind of has pulled me out of, like, I've never been good at it. You know, I've seen other people who excel in it, and I just quite frankly couldn't. And so anyway, having this kind of whole realization around astrology, how the different planets relate to different things, and we can of course go into it in a lot deeper ways when we're thinking about the colors and the resonance between the planets. But ultimately we have all of the planetary, whatever our planetary archetypes are, those are going to show up in our lives, conscious or unconscious. And those planets that I mentioned in the beginning, those 4 planets, Venus, Neptune, Jupiter, and Mercury, they are supposed to play a pretty pivotal role in the first 30 years in our learning experience. But after we turn 30, in a perfect world, if we were all deconditioned, those planets would lose their resonance to us. Like, yes, we would still have them. They would still be an aspect of self, but we would no longer be making decisions because of them. And that has rung really true for me because I was really attached to my Venus, Neptune, Jupiter, and like Mercury gate of opinions until I got to 30 and I started realizing how these things always bring me some kind of fucking trouble. Lora, I think I shared that with you. Did you want to comment on it?
Sort of. I never finished reading the personality resonance mapping, but it makes me think about my own Mars, which in my astrology is sad and wimpy. It's in the 4th house, retrograde in Capricorn, like super detriment. But more so, what was it that I wanted to share? It makes me think about something. What does it make me think about? I had a response. It just didn't take root in my noggin. I can't remember what it was. If you start talking, I'll probably remember again, but like as soon as you put my brain on the spot, it's like, what? Squirrel? Puppy?
I know. Well, I guess like one of the questions that I had for you, and maybe this was one of the audios that you didn't listen
Probably.
to. But one of the questions that I asked you was just like, how much do you relate to your personality Mars? Like, how much do you relate to your, and maybe we can like
Okay.
shelf
I
this and
remembered.
put it.
I remembered.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
It makes me
Love that.
think about and question the impact these planets have on our definition, which create our bodies, our channels, our authorities. So like say you have one of these subpar planets, whether it's, you know, like Mercury or Jupiter or what have you, like I do, um, as my authority. I have Jupiter in gate 48, which is like the gate of my spleen that creates my splenic channel, which creates my authority. Which, you know, this is going off the topic of last episode when we were like, is our center's authority or is it tone? But for today, let's just say it's a center. What happens to that channel as I age if that planet loses its resonance to me, and my identity and my role and my cross in life, and the role I have here, like how does it affect that eventual panning out and trajectory if that planet loses its grip, so to speak. But in terms of like how much do I resonate with my Mars is dissonant, I believe. It's in gate 56 in human design, 56.2. Um, Again, like I said, fourth house Cancer, Mars, retrograde, all that in my astrological chart, but it's dissonant. And I wonder how that dissonance affects my relationship with it because um, from the astrological perspective, Mars is our willpower. And on the human design side, that's our ego center. And I always said, I don't have one. Haha, don't have one of those. I was born without it. And like my ability to motivate myself to do anything is just like, it does not exist, like the limit. And yeah, it shows up as my love of home and my energy within like crafting and like doing homey gardening things with that fourth house. But in terms of being passive aggressive or like being really motivated to do certain things, like it doesn't exist for me. Um, I, well, Mars again, like it's hard to separate human design from astrology because like the way things overlap are not equivocal. Like passive aggressiveness comes from the undefined emotional center that avoids confrontation. So I have that sort of passive aggressiveness, but it's more of avoiding confrontation at all costs energy that comes from that center. So do we say that it comes from that center, or does it come from Mars? But in terms of like looking at the human design side and looking at not authority, but definition, like I said, Mars is in 56.2, which we both have, partially defined by a node. You have your south nodes in 56. I have my design south node, north node, design north node in 11. So we both have half of this channel defined by what's non-player character, whatever, NPC. I feel like that's the trendy term people use, me trying to be hip and cool with y'all. It's sort of NPC in terms of like how things show up because it's more what we see around us or what we're among around us if it's environmental on the design side compared to like who we are, like being a planet that embodies us through neutrinos. So I feel like these are a bunch of scattered thoughts that don't have a point as per usual, but that is my very oblong explanation for how I relate to Mars to answer your question very, very poorly.
Well, I just want to say that like a few things happened when I learned about this, and of course, like I wish that he went into more detail about each planet, but he didn't. Perhaps in other lectures and things of that nature, as far as what you're saying too about having these planets define, giving you definition and like what that means for inner authority and all of that kind of. He noted that there's going to be instances where you do have like a Jupiter Saturn creating definition into a channel, right?
Yeah.
But now what I realized is that Mars is a mutative force, and so now I'm looking at that in terms of, okay, this is if I'm in a sense performing my Mars, which would be unconsciously, mind you, because mine is also in dissonance, and that's what it means, is that it's not something that you're really conscious of. So being able to describe it well, I wouldn't expect that. And I also think about the gate of stimulation, not in Cancerian terms, despite the fact that it is a Cancerian gate. But I think it may cross over into Leo too. It's on the cusp.
Yeah,
But
mine's in Cancer, but it
yeah,
is the cusp.
I know, I'm just saying that like 56 is not the prototypical Cancer as far as I'm concerned with the way that it shows up. I mean, maybe it is. The stimulation is very lunar in a sense, and that kind of need for stimulation to give or receive it. But for me, the 45.4, which is where my Mars is all about me basically like handling resources. And I realized that like people have always looked to me for that, whether, or not I was conscious of that's what they were doing, with the expectation that I would be able to do it. But my Mars was super immature, and like I certainly was in not self land. And there's a different way that Mars shows up when you are working on the lateral and the vertical of the magic square as opposed to the diagonals. But now I understand Mars as being the first step in essentially in mutating yourself into being deconditioned. And so now I'm looking at Mars with new eyes. I become more of a fan of Mars because there's been a lot of heat that Mars has gotten, pun intended,
I was
over
gonna say brunch.
I know, over the years. Oh goodness. But have like realizing that, and then seeing as I'm maturing, becoming more like having more of a capacity for that kind of behavior, even though it's still like in a sense like it'll always be a Mars placement and it'll never be a different planet that's placed there. But seeing that in those relationships that activate my Mars is where a lot of my consciousness gets shifted. And so I wonder, too, like for, I'm thinking about you in the sense of, my node, my south node. So one of my link nodes, right, is conjoined your Mars. And I feel like our relationship is something that may be mutative. I think that the same thing for a lot of it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be, but I think that a lot of the relationships I've had that have martial undertones because of planetary placements, specifically people who have the 21, but also people who have the 45, I see a lot of places where I have shifted my consciousness because of the situations that I've been brought into. That is just a theory for me because of my understanding of astrology and then also human design, and like starting to, also because in astrology I'm and me and Lora both are Mars ruled. She has an Aries rising for her personality chart, and I have Scorpio rising for my personality chart. So there's a lot of, questions, of course, I still have, but I've certainly seen the importance of martial relationships in the movement forward of my like life and consciousness and everything else. So yeah, I don't know what you would say about that, Laura. I don't know if you feel like this has been a mutative relationship for you or not, but
Well, it brings up a point, which can segue us into our next topic, which is left angle versus right angle. Your Mars works for you in a personal destiny mutative way, whereas mine might work for me in a transpersonal way, in which it mutates others, right? So
yeah. Well, do
there's
you
that.
want to? Is that all you wanted to say about
Well,
left angle and right
this theme
angle?
is inspired by Lara and Johannes of the Practical Human Design Group, who put out a video recently for us today. I don't know, y'all go watch it. It's good. Talking about the huge differences of just functioning as a human with a right angle versus a left angle, being transpersonal or having personal destiny. And I highly resonate with what Johannes said, though he's a 6'2" and I'm a 5'1", of like not having an own individual purpose. Like existing and having purpose is for others. And like I knew this before human design. I knew this through my astrology of having a ninth house stellium, being a Sagittarius with my North Node in Sagittarius. It's just like who I am is not for me. Like most of my planets are on like the top hemisphere of my chart. It's very like other person oriented, centric. And I kind of always knew like I am not here for me. sadly. I say sadly because I'm just like, ugh, I don't want to be here on this planet. I'm over it. Like, can I go back to the ethers, please? And the answer is no, because there's karma here with other people, and there's like nothing I have to figure out for myself here. I feel like I've had plenty of lifetimes to do that before. Like, this lifetime is not about figuring things out for myself, but it's because of those karmic bonds in which I have to interact with other people and help them along their own journeys, which is, it's frustrating. Like, I want to be selfish, and we're coming into 2027 in which part of our global incarnation cross theme will be selfishness. And so it's going to be like a different playground for all humans, um, personal destiny and transpersonal karma people alike, to explore selfishness in those ways. Not explore it, but just like have that be imposed upon us, which is a whole other topic. Don't mean to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, I highly identify with feeling at a loss for purpose on my own and needing other people to fulfill my role here. And yeah, and so perhaps going back to that Mars energy, like, it's not about mutating myself, it's about mutating others. And I've even said this to you at some point before, sir, I think, but a lot of times when I interact with people in Aura, um, they don't invite my 1156 out. I feel like people plug into it and then borrow it. And just my presence is stimulating enough for people to like start sharing their stories. And they don't want to hear my stories, but my aura allows them to plug into me, kind of like a reflector, um, and allows them capacity to access 1156. And then they start doing all the storytelling. And I feel like that's partially also due to me having gate 13, the gate of the listener. But
Yeah.
yeah, it just shows up as like me having to deal with other people and me not being the one that actively stimulates. It's like a passive stimulation that I don't necessarily like all the time in aura with other people. Um, yeah, it's weird, but it seems, transpersonal in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely. Well, and I think that, I'm thinking about my dad because my dad's a 5-1, and I'm thinking about his not self too, because I think that in a sense he wanted to be selfish, you know what I mean? He didn't feel like dealing with all the transpersonal karma stuff, and he really just wanted to like live his own life for himself, and like time and time again he kept hitting walls where indeed he needed to be transpersonal, like where his life was transpersonal, where he and the way that he behaved and who he was with really was a part of his karma, even if in the beginning of the relationship it seemed like it was like all fun and games and it was like purely from his own uh I guess sense of personal identity, which he doesn't have a defined G, but he's very not self projector. But I think that there are ways too in which he, with his Mars, was going to get mutated too within relationships with other people, where if he had actually allowed, I guess, or released his own, I want to say, selfishness, a lot of his awareness would have transformed within those martial relationships. And I say that because his Mars is in 22, which is the abridging gate for me. And he never behaved in a transpersonal way with me, really. Like I knew that he was responsible for me and that he was shirking his responsibilities to me, And so I don't think that it's strictly for the other, because it requires mutation for a 5-1 who's been conditioned to live correctly as themselves in the beginning. Maybe not when they're correct, but in the beginning I think it still requires some mutation out of the not self. So you know, I definitely see what you're saying, but I also think that it is a two-way street. It's not just that other people mutate me, it's also that I mutate others, even though I have personal karma. And that's only from my own, just like looking into my own Mars relationships with important people in my life, and how either they've activated my Mars or I've activated their Mars by gate or by bridge gate or something of that sort.
Yeah. I want to ask you, do you remember the two themes of the diagonals? One is Moon and Pluto, and the other is Neptune. I mean, not Neptune, Saturn and Uranus, with Mars being that center figure. To think of like the context of like how Mars plays into these actions, not the right word, but like these two diagonals. Oh, if you can hear my dog in the background, please excuse her. But the Mars isn't a lone operator, right? Like he is working within the structure of these two diagonals. So do you remember what they're about?
No, I haven't finished reading it, so that's gonna have to wait till next week. But
Okay, or not. No promises.
no promises, but likely I will still be on this tip. But what I do remember is that Mars is it's like the initiative spark of those diagonals in general.
Okay.
It's like the first step if we're thinking about it in terms of like a Fibonacci spiral. It's like the beginning of the spiral. That's how I understood it. But no, I can't speak to the difference of the two diagonals, because what Laura is also referring to is the fact that like there is a label for each horizontal and vertical.
Yes.
Within that square. And so there is, as logic would suggest, a name for the diagonals that Mars is involved with. And when I figure that out, I will either only share it with Laura, or if it comes up next week, then I'll talk about it next week. But it's just given me a new, like, I used to just like I kind of like, self-loathing 12.3, but I kind of just like hated the fact that I was Mars ruled. I was like, that's not feminine, that's not girl, I not self-hated it. And now I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, no wonder. I'm like, it's like no wonder why I have never been able to just allow myself to just like, be super okay with not mutating or not changing. But anyway, I still am half baked in the personality resonance mapping. So
Forever half baked, I feel is like
forever
her
half
theme.
baked. Yeah. I mean, I have a ton of information in my head and none of it makes any sense. So until it comes out, and then I'm like, damn, what did she just say? Like, I'm like, wait. I didn't even know that until I said it. So, yeah, so we're both learning along with whoever's listening to this. Is there anything else, Laura, that we wanted to touch on, or is there anything else that you wanted to touch on?
Yes. Gate 37. Can we?
Yeah. Let's talk
Well,
about
this
it.
pertains to stuff Sarah's been experiencing in Live and Living Color. But Saturn moved back into 37 last week before. I don't know when exactly. That's my moon, my personality moon, 37.1. And Saturn's gonna be in 37 until March 20th, I think. And 2024, if you're listening to this like far in the future, which don't know if you would be, but you never know, 2024. And gate 37 is an interesting one. It has been hardcore, showing up like very like in your face for us. Maybe Sarah more so than me, but because I have it, and it's not self-themed because it's an open center for me. But it is kind of like stark and be like, I'm here. Come at me, with Saturn being the planet of constriction and limitations and discipline and punishment. So it's been a theme, which is love and affection for the tribe and family, and how that shows up in tribal dynamics, family dynamics, how it shows up in its highs and lows of being an emotional gate. Like, we're not always at an emotional high to give and share love with one another. And sometimes there's lows to that vibration. And yeah, the tribal commitments, it's interesting. So I don't know how much you wish to speak about your personal experiences, Sarah, but or if you want to generalize. But yeah, do you have thoughts about this particular transit?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just, as someone who is not tribal,
Nor
and
am
I
I.
can't,
Yeah.
yeah, nor are you, but but I think you have a decent amount of tribal not self stuff.
Yes.
And of course, I mean, it's all not self in a sense if you don't have it anyway. So do I, but I've never identified as being tribal, although I think I've been traumatized. I've been, conditioned, not self. I call conditioning basically trauma. It's whatever brings you
It's the
I
same
call
thing.
well, it is anything that pulls you away from who it is that you are. I feel like is trauma, and I think that's conditioning too. So I guess I look at it in a little bit of a different way.
Well, I want to be the devil's advocate just for a quick second to interrupt you. And I told you offline this past week that sometimes conditioning can be super yummy. It's not always traumatic.
Well,
We say,
no, but I mean the deep kind of conditioning that is the type of conditioning where you see yourself in like those types of repetition compulsions.
and you're
To
making
me,
decisions from that place
correct.
consistently on being untrue. Like that is traumatic, but just conditioning in and of itself is not
Right.
necessarily traumatic. Just
Right.
wanted to
Thank you for
clarify.
our listeners. Yeah, for our listeners, conditioning is not only delicious sometimes, it's really how we gain awareness and wisdom. So it's not certainly not all trauma, but I think the parts of us that when we are deconditioning them that we've identified as ourselves for so long over the years, we've falsely identified usually comes from some kind of underlying trauma. The things that we identify with that are not us.
Yes.
Um, but oh shit, what was I about to say? Um,
Being conditioned
tribal.
traumatically to be
Oh,
tribal.
okay. So the 2644 is a very prickly gate for me, and it's a very tribal gate, and I was very much conditioned by that gate growing up, and so not only does my not self feel responsible to be tribal, it also feels shame and guilt when it's not capable of being when I'm not capable of being tribal, or I don't want to do it naturally, whatever the case may be. By the way, the 4037 is also like a quid pro quo love gate. It's the channel is like it's a love channel, and the 4037 is really about like you give and I get, or like what, there's a quid pro quo quality to it. And I, maybe my not self, call it what you will, hate that shit. And it's been hard because I'm living with someone who I'm all collective, both my channels are collective, and I'm staying with someone whose family who's all tribal. And I can see how important support is to her, and I also want to only be giving it when it is correct for me, because otherwise it's coming from that trauma, that trigger, the not self mind populating the 2644, me trying to prove my worth and being attached to things that aren't good for me. And my not self will always be like guilting me if I don't do what the tribal thing to do is, even if it's not correct for me to do it. And so seeing that show up, I've had to, like, I can be very prickly with my emotional wave. Like, it is what it is. And I've spent a lot of time domesticating my emotional wave to please other people. And I've basically gotten to the point in my life where I'm done doing that. I'm not just gonna, like, do whatever everybody wants in order to be liked, loved, appreciated, whatever the case is. And while I'm doing that overcorrection, I'm kind of falling maybe too far to the opposite side, which is not necessarily correct for me either, right? Like I'm trying to actively not do things that are incorrect for me, but like that's not necessarily natural either. So there's been this difficulty, I feel like, with tribal energy, trying to know when it's good to give support, trying to understand that if I disappoint someone, it does not mean that I'm doing something that's incorrect, trying to deal with the tension point that exists between correctness and disappointing people. Because I think that, I don't know who said this, somebody on some Facebook group within the human design world said, it's like a decision happens because we have tension. We have to make a decision because there's a tension about what's right or what's wrong. If we didn't have that tension, we would just naturally be doing shit and not thinking about needing to make a decision or not needing to make a decision. So that's why human design is so important, because it's about decision making when there is tension, when you aren't just naturally able to make a decision for yourself because you've been so conditioned for so long. Now I'm going down a rabbit hole, but point is that I've been probably pretty disagreeable and slightly insufferable in my own way, trying to do what's correct for me. And like Ra has acknowledged that, like, yeah, you're going to alienate people when you start radically living your own design. But, you know, it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, where I don't necessarily feel good saying no, but I also don't feel good saying yes. And so it becomes the better of two evils, or I guess you could say the more correct of two evils when it comes to the tribal support that's required of me, and not necessarily being fully recognized. I think I am recognized in a lot of ways, but I'm not. But when there's things that are requested of me, it's really things that are requested of my not self. You know, there's requests that's put on me because I am capable, not to say that I have the capacity for those things. And so seeing Saturn moving in the 37, there's just been a lot of stuff that has come up around that. And it's also been interesting because this past week Mercury conjoined Pluto, and I had kind of like a deep conversation, not about this, but in terms of just like creating understanding around what it is that I am and why it is that I do the things that I do where I'm staying right now. And I feel like that conversation, it really dispelled a lot of the underlying tension that was making it difficult for me to live as myself without feeling guilt or shame, saying no to things, right? And so, yeah, it's just been interesting seeing how triggered I get by tribal energy, and how I really don't feel like I want to be tribal ever, you know? And I feel like a lot of people who have tribal energy, there's a lot of like, you get the selfishness label if you don't like to support other people or this, that, or the other thing. And so there's a lot of homogenized concepts around the moral superiority of support, you know? And, you know, it's, the human design's amoral. It's not about that. It's about living correctly as yourself. So I've had to like, I think what I'm realizing is that I'm having to pull a lot of these old beliefs up that exist, because what Ra has said too is that there's all of this baggage that we are carrying within our open centers while we're deconditioning, right? I have 2644 baggage. Like, that's what it is. And, you know, there's baggage in all of my other centers. They may not be as deep, but nonetheless, it's the baggage that we start to release as we decondition. And I feel like part of these things that are triggering me happening, you know, you can feel like you did something wrong when you get triggered. And it's really hard in human design, because being happy and untriggered does not mean you're living correctly as yourself either. So it's like, you know, the spiritual community can like make you think that as long as you feel good and everything's great, like that you are living life correctly as yourself. And again, that comes down to a moral judgment that isn't actually correct. You can be deeply triggered and going through painful situations, and that can be correct for you. And so it's just, I guess I've been just harping on, um realizing that these triggers aren't inherently bad, that these situations that trigger me aren't inherently wrong, that it's actually bringing a lot of awareness to myself. And I still see my not self going into um relationship, like I still see my not self doing stuff, but now I'm like aware that it's my not self, and so I can stop feeling so like just this is right, this is wrong kind of concept. Like I'm going to be doing not self things. I'm going to be doing conditioned things as long as I don't identify myself with them. And I think that's also why the overcorrection for me, going from a people pleaser who is like a good time gal, just doing whatever everybody wanted and running myself ragged in the process. Like I have gone in the exact opposite direction where I'm basically like a toddler who just learned the word no. And so I'm just knowing everything just so that everyone gets the idea that when I do something, when I'm giving something of myself, when I'm cleaning, when I'm helping out with all different kinds of like little things that I'm just doing naturally, that I'm doing it just out of my essence. Like it's not because anyone gave me anything or because it was required of me or any of those things. It's just because it's correct for my body to do it. And I don't expect anyone else to do anything for me unless it's correct for them to be doing it as well. And so I've been allowing myself to do all of that stuff. But if something doesn't feel correct for me, I'm going to say no so that I can kind of like, it's almost like I am resetting the pH of the system so that everybody knows like this is what I is correct for me to do and this is not what's correct for me to do. And there's a lot of love that I have to give when I don't have expectations placed upon it. And when I do, I clam up like a fucking little clam. And so I don't know. This is a very long tangent away from the 37, but point is that Saturn is about like limitation and constriction. And so and Saturn's also a planet that is part of our awareness, our conscious awareness coming online. And so it creates limitations though and constriction and constraint in places where we may not like the feeling of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. But yeah, I mean, is that clear, Laura? Because I know I didn't want to say anything extremely specific, but
Yeah, it all makes sense. And to wrap up that little theme, like I feel like it validates last week's theme of no choiceness of, these like astrology is no choice. Like it shows up and you can't stop it. And themes will come up and issues will come up, whether in your own head or externally, and you have to cope or deal with it or grow or expand or mutate or contract or whatever, because you can't turn it off. Like we cannot turn off the neutrinos coming from Saturn in gate 37. But it also brings up a point which we won't get into today, but the whole global incarnation thing, Bob, of how we have 3047
yeah.
establishing our reality right now, and it's gonna like turn off and it's gonna be
Mm-hmm.
day and night, and I feel like society isn't gonna know what to do with itself. But yeah, so like not only is it a theme right now because of Saturn, but it's a theme that we've been dealing with for 400 years.
Damn.
And it's just part of how we operate, to understand love within the context of quid pro quo, or like love languages, like acts of service or items or whatever it is. Like I feel like love languages is a 37 type of entity theme
Yeah.
concept, because it's like, how do we give love? How do we get love? And do we want to give it unconditionally, not unconditionally, but like what are the terms in which we feel inclined to give it, or what are the times in which we want to receive it? What are the things that are happening to create the exchange of love?
Yeah.
Yeah, but also another thing I wanted to quickly mention in terms of like tribal, like we're not here to be tribal, and yet we have everything within the chart. And even though we have the centers that are consistent within us, we have all of our non-self themes within us as well, like all the whiteness. And it's not the best analogy, but I sometimes like to think of it as like, you have the entire body graph as a clear pane of glass, and you're putting color on all your definition. You're coloring it in. And so like light cannot filter through those particular gates and centers because they're already filled in with pigment. And everything else is still transparent. But at the same time, there's also white paint. That white paint is our not self, and it's going to fill up those gaps as well and reflect light in different ways. It reflects all the different colors of light, not just black, which absorbs all the colors. Um, but it makes me think of like, you and I were collective. We're here to be consistently collective, and yet we still experience tribalism, and yet we still experience individuality, and they're themes that are part of this reality that you have to deal with. Like you can't turn off tribalism. You can't turn off, if you're like highly individual, you can't turn off the collective qualities of being human. Like it's part of being human to be all three. And it makes me think of Ra, who like had a family and children. Like he was tribal, even though he was highly individual. He was collective. He like put human design out for the collective. It became universalized for the collective. He still had those experiences and qualities within himself, but they were just not who he was consistently here to be. And so likewise, we can't be lone wolves. Even if you're highly individualistic or non-tribal, like being a lone wolf and not having any interactions is impossible because we're humans, part of a species, and we have to kind of interact with one another. Unless you're like an astronaut in a spaceship by yourself with no other astronauts with you. Like then you can be highly individualistic, but even then you are not on the planet anymore, so you're not really experiencing conditioning in the same way. But that's a whole other concept. Anywho, yeah,
Truly.
those are
Yeah.
just the things that I wanted to respond to quickly
No,
before
I
we
mean,
wrap up.
yeah, before we wrap up, I know me and Laura really can just go, but um funny thing that Ross said though, of course, is that he eats by himself because that's what he has to do, and he said that he can only be around generators, which happen to be his whole family, for 20 minutes at a time. So boundaries, and this is where knowing what's you and what's not you is so important, because it's like you want to be recognized for who it is that you are, not who it is that you are not.
Yeah.
And if you find yourself being consistently recognized from who it is that you are not, your resentment/bitterness, hey projectors, is going to appreciate. It's just going to get bigger and bigger. So it's a matter of, when you are being conditioned in situations, like the boundaries that you have around what you are and what you're not is going to really determine how you feel about the conditioning and what kind of awareness you can gain from it. And so, yeah, I mean, totally agreed, Laura, that we are everything, and that we are here to be students in the places that we don't have definition. And so we're never going to escape the human experience. I mean, we will eventually, but I mean, we're not going to escape it as long as we're in these bodies. And so there's something to be said, of course, about holding space for all of the different types of energy and energy circuitry that exists within the chart, but just not falsely identifying yourself with it, and not allowing other people to only recognize you for that and require you to behave from that place if you are going to be, a wet welcome. And that's basically like a not good projector invitation, right? It's like the opposite of what we want as projectors. So yeah, I think it's like it's hard to kind of get that monkey off your back at first, and then once people start to understand, it's like they'll kind of back off a little bit more over time, with the expectations of, and the moral superiority of, oh, you're a good girl if you're helping your mom or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's how we get conditioned into tribal shit in the first place. So, or thinking that we have to be. But as Laura said, we're going to start wrapping up here because this has been another long, long, long episode. We decided to do it on the Spotify app this time. So hopefully it sounds just as good as our other episodes. And as per usual, well, actually, Laura, do you have anything you want to add before I close?
No, so yeah, sorry if we sound funny or if we cut out. It wasn't us doing anything on purpose. It's the internet. I do want to say we're now on YouTube. We're back onto YouTube. I think I mean, if you're there, then you obviously know we're talking to you through YouTube right now. But we're back there in case not visually but audibly. If you prefer that platform for listening to things, you can access our energy there.
Indeed. And on Instagram at Projector Stories, come and hang out and send us a DM or follow, whatever feels correct for you. There is more information about how to reach out to us in the show notes. But otherwise, thank you for listening along. If you are here on this journey with us, we do appreciate you. We hope that our collective brains are fun and potentially mutative for your process.
I hope I'm stimulating for you with my 56.
Exactly. All right, everybody. See you next time.
Catch you on the flip side.